So today is March 23rd. I'm recording this in the evening, but your discussion questions and your fast write for the week are already up, so you guys should just get those done before what would have been our class time on Friday, and that way I can use Friday morning and afternoon to respond to you. So I guess the first thing we should discuss is that your assignment materials are up. So for this unit, as you know, you're going to be writing an essay in which you critically analyze an animated film. So it could be a Disney film or it could be something else. The main guidelines are that it has to be animated and its audience has to be children. So like Attack on Titan would not be a good example for you to use, right? Like it has to be for kids. So I guess you guys can just kind of post your questions about that. I've responded to like a couple so far, but just make sure that when you are asking those questions, put them in the provided forum on Moodle instead of just emailing them to me, because that way I can like help everyone with the answer as opposed to just answering like 9 million of the same email, which I've already been doing for a lot of my other classes, and it's driving me a little crazy. So just use the questions forum. So your goal with this assignment is really going to be to take like the ideas that we're looking at in the readings from the unit and apply those to a Disney movie. So an example of like a topic that might work would be something like gender roles in Cinderella, maybe, right? And so then you could talk about how Cinderella is expected to just clean all the time, and she never does anything to get out of her situation. She's rescued by Prince Charming. Like his literal name is Prince Charming in that movie. So that kind of tells us that the role of a woman is to like be beautiful enough to make a man fall in love with you, and then maybe your situation will change. But like you shouldn't try to do it yourself. And then that could be complicated if you look at like, you know, the role of the stepmother and the stepsisters and all of that. So that's the kind of thing I want you thinking about with this essay. So yeah, I guess if you have any questions, just put them in the forum, as I've said 100 times, sorry. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys today a little bit about Carmen Maria Machado's essay, The Trash Heap Has Spoken. So this is not an academic essay. This would be considered like a popular source, right? It's published in the magazine Guernica. Its audience is really anyone who like reads that magazine. It's like it's a literary and cultural magazine that's like pretty famous. So that doesn't mean it's not a good source. It just means that it's not like a peer-reviewed source that's making an academic argument. So instead, this is kind of a hybrid of a personal essay where she talks about what these different villains, or they're not all villains, what these different portrayals of fat women in children's media meant to her when she was younger, and what they mean to her now that she's older. So I think that most of the work we're going to do this week will just be in the discussion, where I posted questions for you guys to address, but I guess there are just like some things I want to mention about the reading as well. So her primary purpose with this essay is to, I think, show the importance of representation in media. So she is focusing on how important it is to have fat women be represented in good ways. And she takes on all of these stereotypes, right? I don't have it printed because I don't have a printer and school is closed, so I'm just going to have to kind of go from this. So she lists a lot of different like stereotypes of fat people in the media. I'm trying to find where exactly she does this. Okay, so this is there are no page numbers, so you can just try to follow along, sorry. But she says here. In Mad Max Fury Road, the only fat women are seen in passing with milk pumps attached to their giant breasts like cows in a barn. In Now and Then, the only fat girl, Chrissy, is also the only one who doesn't get her own backstory. In the first episode of Jessica Jones, a nameless fat woman who looks a lot like me gets off a treadmill to shove a burger in her face, and Jessica says, Riley, 2 minutes on the treadmill, 20 minutes on a quarter pounder. And then she says, sometimes I imagine movies and shows I love with a fat actress instead of a thin one, but identical in every other way. I think about fried green tomatoes with a voluptuous Ruth, or a stout Idgie next to each other in the pond. Jane the Virgin with a fat, brilliant, neurotic Jane with 2 men madly in love with her. Death Proof with a chubby Zoe riding that car's hood. Lucky Number 11 with a plump Lindsay smiling and full of secrets. Secretary with a fat Lee bent over that desk, bathed in the copper tub, sprawled out next to James Spader as he tenderly kisses every inch of her. Fat women and girls are matrons, cronies, jokes. They're never romantic leads or heroes. They never get to just be. So I think this is like a really important moment in the essay where she kind of lays out what exactly she wants the reader to take away, right? So she lists all these like stereotypical portrayals of fat women, and then she sort of imagines like another world of media in which fat women get to just exist and just like have lives the same way that skinny women do in movies, and skinny people generally, but she is focusing especially on women. And I think the reason she focuses so specifically on women is that women are like more vulnerable to media portrayals of their bodies within very narrow bounds. So women are really only allowed to, or women are supposed to look a certain way in the movies, even a little more than men, right? So you can kind of apply this to age as well. Like it's a lot more common to see older men get cast in roles where they're still seen as like, I don't know, like sexy and like interesting and heroic, whereas usually older women are playing mothers or something like that, or they just can't get roles at all. So she's imagining what it would be like to see media that portrayed fat women in a positive light. And so this is something that we've talked about, I think, already, but I will go over it like in more detail again. So she's really pointing out the difference between representation and exploitation in media. So exploitation is when you use like someone, I guess, well, the dictionary definition is the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. So let's see if I can find a good definition for you guys that like explains media exploitation. Okay, well, I'll just do my best to explain it then, although as you all know, I'm not very good with these on-the-fly definitions. But exploitation is when someone is used in a way that is dehumanizing, that reduces them to not like a full person, and very often has to do with like racist or sexist or ableist stereotypes of some sort, right? So if we think about this in terms of representations of fat people, like she is saying that, you know, the, for example, the stereotype of the bumbling fat cop, that would be exploitation. That's like a way of exploiting a fat person in a film because it's making fun of them and not showing them as a fully realized human being. Representation in media is when you have like realistic portrayals of all different kinds of people in all different kinds of media. So that's something that has been pushed for a lot in the last few years. And it's what we were talking about with Moana, right? Like Moana is a movie that represents a young, like Pacific Islander girl, and it portrays her in a really positive light, right? So like a young girl might see that movie and she might see herself in Moana, and that's a good thing, right? So representation really has to do with like when we get to see ourselves portrayed in media and who we relate to. So if all media is about skinny women like Cinderella getting saved by handsome princes like Prince Charming, then only like thin, white, good-looking, straight, cis people will get to see themselves represented. And that means that everyone else like feels left out, or sees themselves only represented as the villain or something like that. So it also goes back to Children of Color and the Disney Fairy Tale Princess, in which they talk about how important it is to have princesses of color, and to have, you know, so that little girls can see themselves as princesses no matter what color their skin is, no matter what they look like. So Machado is getting at this, but she's talking about body image and stereotypes surrounding the body. I hope this is making sense. I always feel like I'm just kind of like going on when I'm lecturing into my phone without anyone to talk to or ask questions of, so hopefully this makes sense. So representation is a good thing, exploitation is a bad thing. And Disney often exploits, like, well, maybe not all the time, but at least with the portrayal, no, actually I would say this is true in a few different movies at least. So Disney often exploits fat people by portraying fatness as synonymous with evil. And also with a kind of evil that is self-indulgent, greedy, and I guess self-indulgent and greedy. So Ursula is a really good example of this, right? She's like this giant sea witch, and she steals Ariel's voice and wants to make herself like beautiful so that she can get Eric to fall in love with her. The guy in Pocahontas, I forget what his name is, but he's like the colonial governor. It might be Radcliffe. I think it's Radcliffe. So he's also like he's also portrayed as fat and like sort of slovenly in this way, and you can kind of see this over and over again in a lot of different media. You can probably think of other examples, but that would be an example of exploitation, right? This equation of fatness with badness. Just like in a lot of the movies, darkness is portrayed as synonymous with badness or evil. So Machado was saying like she doesn't really want to keep seeing that, but furthermore, she's going a little bit further than that, and she's not just saying like, oh, this is bad and it shouldn't exist. She's saying that even though in Disney's portrayal of Ursula, we're supposed to see Ursula as the evil one, she actually really likes Ursula and really relates to her, because Ursula is like unapologetic about wanting power, right? She's like kind of a badass in a lot of ways. So she's kind of looking at these characters and seeing the good in them and the ways that they can be, I guess, like models for her and models for other fat women who are watching these movies. Another thing you might notice about this essay is that it's very focused with like sex and the body. So and this is something like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this author, but she's really good. Highly recommend her. She wrote a really cool book called Her Body and Other Parties, of short stories that I love. And she always writes very frankly about sex, but I think that in this essay in particular, that is a really intentional choice, because she's talking about the way that fat bodies are erased from our cultural representation. And so we have been told over and over again, right, that someone who looks like Jasmine, someone who looks like Pocahontas, someone who looks like Cinderella, like all of these women who are very skinny and just sort of conventionally beautiful, like we're told that that is the ideal, and that those are the women who get to have these romantic and like eventually probably sexual relationships, because they look the right way. They look the way that they deserve that. I mean, you couldn't really like look no further than Barbie, right, for like what female beauty standards have been in our culture for a long time. So by writing so frankly about sex, she is kind of filling in this gap where fat women don't get to be portrayed as people with sex lives on TV and in movies. So obviously, like in children's media, that would not be a thing anyway, but it is still implied by the fact that, like, you know, Cinderella and Ariel both get men to fall in love with them solely based on how beautiful they are. It's still implied that their thinness is part of what makes them like sexually desirable, and like because of that, they get to leave behind the circumstances that they didn't like. Okay. So she says at the end, "We love to talk about fatness in the past. That is, about how it was desirable once. It proved you were wealthy or healthy or fertile, which is to say valuable to someone. But now fatness is framed with deserving. Do you deserve to be treated like a person? Do you deserve respect? Do you deserve good health care? Do you deserve love? Clothes that fit? Stylish clothes that fit? Do you deserve to see yourself on a screen, on the page, in a photo, in a way that is not dehumanizing? Do you deserve to love yourself?" And I think she's asking these questions, these sort of rhetorical questions, with the intention that the answer is yes, right? Like everyone deserves to love themselves. Everyone deserves to see themselves portrayed on a screen. Everyone deserves to be loved by others. Everyone deserves health care that doesn't just tell them, oh, like, you're fat, lose weight, and then come back and tell me how you feel. So, again and again, I guess we see, like, in these discussions of different Disney characters and Disney movies, there's actually, like, implications for the real world, right? Because on the one hand, this is an essay about Ursula and also about Marjorie from Fraggle Rock. But in another way, this is an essay about how fat women and fat people deserve the same things that thin people do, and that we live in a culture that's really obsessed with shaming fat people, and that's not okay, right? And so obviously, like, a lot of people use the argument like, oh, it's not healthy to be fat, but I guess one thing I would just address is that there is actually a lot of evidence that it's more unhealthy for fat people to live in a world where they're constantly told that they should lose weight than it is to actually be fat. So the mental anguish of constantly being shamed is worse than any like physical ramifications of fatness. So that is something to keep in mind as well. And at the end, she talks about this idea of the fat mind, and she talks about the writer Shirley Jackson. And so I talked to you in the discussion forum, or I asked a question of you in the discussion forum about what she means by a fat mind. And I don't want to like tell you the answer, but I think at the end, this really becomes an essay about what it means to take up space, right? Especially as a woman, like you're often told to take up less space, to like be quieter, or to like be nicer, to do things for other people, basically to just be like smaller in all these ways. And this is not always true, obviously, but it is, I think it rings true culturally for a lot of women. And it's not just with your body, right? It's also with like women who are loud are often told that they're too loud in a way that men aren't. There's a lot of research that shows that people perceive women as taking up too much of the conversation, or talking too much, even when women are talking maybe 30 or 40% of the time during a conversation. So just all these ways in which women are told to take up less space. And she is saying that she wants to take up more space, right? So taking up space with her body is one way to push against those standards, but taking up space with the mind is another way to push against those standards, right? So like Shirley Jackson was both fat and a genius of a writer, and so she kind of talks about that, and she talks about how like some critics saw it as like a problem that she was physically fat, and Machado is saying, well, that's not fair, right? She was fat and a genius, right? That's not, those two things can easily go together. So she says this here: a friend of Jackson's once said that she, quote, took up literally half the sofa, but when she opened her mouth, everything changed. She was witty, brilliant, and she knew it and used it. But that horrible little conjunction, a tiny three-letter word that reduces Shirley Jackson to a contradiction, a fat woman who was also, strangely, witty and brilliant, instead of what she simply was, a brilliant, witty, fat woman, all of her qualities aligned. So this would be an example of a woman who does not fall into the normal stereotypes of fatness and like stupidity or humor or any of these things that the media gives us so much of. Okay. So I think that is everything I kind of have to say to you guys about this reading. So that is our sort of vaguely in-person contact for the week. So please, I guess, put any questions you might have in the discussion forum with the questions for this reading. And also make sure that you are taking the library quiz. So I put up like a library like information tutorial, as well as, well, it's an information tutorial and it ends in a quiz. So make sure that you are taking that and doing the quiz. Put your full name in there so that I can like keep track of who took it. And that should help you to find sources from home. And we did go over this in class the last time we were in person, but I know a lot of you weren't there. So if you are having a hard time, you can always use the library chat feature. And if that's not working, you can contact me. Yeah, so I think that's it. I hope you guys are staying safe, staying home, and staying healthy. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.